So I think like there's a meme that always goes around. It says that BPD is basically bipolar but faster. But so yeah, it's like kind of more intense mood swings, but usually like more frequent. So it could be throughout the day or most like a week, possibly, with intense fear of abandonment, lack of self-image, intense unstable relationships. Funnily enough, I had a lot of people in my life in the past who would constantly say, oh, you know, you need to stand up for yourself more, you need to get more of a backbone. But then when I do it to them, they do not like it at all. And I'm like, so basically you mean I'll stand up for yourself, but not to me?
Brian, welcome back. It's good to see you again. And, you know, I didn't record that first bit, but just to start off this podcast, Brian's just mentioned that someone blocked him for not getting back to a message in time. And that's something I've got very strong views on at the minute. It's I call it social rhythms. You know, we have periods in which we sometimes you can be messaging people all the time. Sometimes you feel like you need to step back, and I feel like that's going to kind of come up quite a bit today, because obviously today I want to focus a lot on the communication aspect of BPD and how you're probably required to over communicate practically everything. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, as well as like just like over explaining as well, like why I can't do something, or I think, like, to be honest, you know, like holding my hands up, I very much used to be that person. It was like, oh my God, they haven't messaged. I get quite angry or annoyed. But I think for me, it's just more putting it into perspective of that, you know, other people have lives, I have lives, and I have a life. Oh, wait, multiple lives maybe. But I think like, as well, like, I don't have my notifications on for any of my social media, as far as I'm aware. And just because I'm so much into kind of really focusing on my mental health and making sure I'm not put under too much stress, like whenever I'd get a notification or message, I'd constantly be like looking at my phone, and then like, it sounds stupid, like I couldn't even like relax like playing a game or anything, because I'm like, oh crap, I've got to message somebody, or my phone's lighting up over there. And I think luckily, like with my partner, for example, like he understands sometimes that I'm not that talkative, but other times I think as well, like sometimes I just get quite paranoid or worried if, like, for example, like I can't get through to him, for example. I'm like, oh God, has something happened? But sometimes that comes across as like checking up on them too much.
Yeah.
Where actually it's just like, oh God, usually I'll get through to them and I can't, and then it just makes me panic.
So I was going to ask, obviously, since the last time we talked, like what's new in your life, and obviously you've just mentioned your partner very briefly there. Which is, you know, it's awesome. It's awesome to see. Also, am I right in saying this, in the fact that you're now kind of pursuing a diagnosis of autism, which was just kind of at very, very early stages when we spoke last? Yeah.
So basically about a month or so after getting with my partner, actually, I had like another crisis incident, just because loads of things built up. I moved out. I think, I would have moved out by the time I'd done the first one in here. So I moved out, which is a big change in itself. Within a month, found my neighbour dead. And then got with Ben about a month after that. So even though there was like good changes and bad changes, there was a lot of change. And then basically about a month into our relationship, basically I found out that people had said to him before we'd actually met. Oh, I think. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Oh.
I think it did just change from either, you know, from the headphone speakers to your phone speaker or vice versa.
Okay. Sorry. But yeah, so like basically people had said stuff to him before we'd met. And so, but basically I found out that he said something like not, it wasn't like terrible, but it was just like, oh, like you had that opinion of me without actually getting to know me. But also found out something else. And that really sent me into like a flashback of when I was in an abusive relationship. And so I went into a massive crisis point. And I think it was a few days before that, we were on the tube. I think it was around the time of football. And so like it was really loud. All of a sudden I ran off the tube. I had a breakdown on the tube, like on the tube platform. So a lot had built up. But then I was speaking to I think it was the crisis team, and they mentioned about autism, because I was already awaiting an ADHD and autism assessment anyway. Then I think it was about October, November, I had a mental health review. Basically, they said that they feel I'm on the spectrum, but obviously I have to go through the actual assessment and actually wait for the assessment to happen. Obviously, NHS, that takes ages. But which is quite confusing because there seems to be quite a lot of overlap with BPD and autism. And so I'm currently in a thing like really questioning what's going on.
Yeah, that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which I need to put a pin in and come back to. I really need notes because I want to do this in some form of systematic order. We'll come back to that connection in a minute, because just for the kind of people who if it's their first time hearing you, or it's their first time hearing about BPD, because we still have some of the people that were here last time when you were here, but we have a very different audience both here and on the podcast now. Could you kind of briefly just give us the rundown of what BPD is and a sort of brief of what your experience with it's been for those who haven't already heard that story?
So I think like there's a meme that always goes around. It says that BPD is basically bipolar but faster. But so yeah, it's like kind of more intense mood swings, but usually like more frequent. So it could be throughout the day, or most of like a week, possibly, with intense fear of abandonment, lack of self-image, intense unstable relationships, frequent self-harm and suicidal threats, behavior, not threats, but, kind of like things.
Yeah, intrusive thoughts.
Dissociation, being impulsive, anger, which can either be internalized or externalized, depending whether you're traditional BPD or quiet BPD. And so I think like, I actually had a conversation with Ben the other day that now that I've kind of got the people in my life that I'm happy with having in my life, I've noticed my relationships aren't that intense or unstable. And especially as well, since moving out from home and realizing that was a toxic environment in itself, like it seems a bit too much of a coincidence that I seem to be doing relatively better, like a lot better.
Yeah.
Since. And there's always been a debate about whether BPD can be cured or whether you can go into remission with the symptoms. But yeah, I think with my friends and even with Ben, I think, I'm in the most stable relationships I've had. But looking back, I realized that like they were intense or unstable because they'd just like treat me like crap, or treat me just like an option, but then I try and call them out and then they tell me I had an attitude, or have you taken your meds, or things like that. And even just then going for dismissive partners, which I'm not sure if everybody's aware, like listening to this, that often happens because of your attachment styles or like your upbringing. You kind of tend to kind of repeat those kind of relationships because they feel familiar.
Yeah.
I think definitely looking back, and even again, just being with Ben, like realizing like I wasn't asking for too much, for them not to cheat or, actually want to talk and be in a relationship. I felt like I was always chasing, but it's kind of like an addiction. When you're with somebody that's dismissive, that they finally text you back, or they're finally like, oh yeah, I want to see you. Because like, oh yeah, they want to see me, but then looking back, it was always pretty much on their terms.
I think when people play the mental illness card, and what I don't mean people who have it playing the card. What I mean is the partners of people who have it playing the card. Is whenever any challenging behavior comes up, as in that calls the other person out, it's like, it's because I have justice sensitivity as part of mine. So like basically if something's unjust or if something's hypocritical, oh my God, like I just can't, like my rationality just goes out the window the second if someone accuses me of doing something that they themselves do like 10 times more than me. It's like, that's my emotions are now in overdrive, but so those kind of things come out, which is actually part of the condition and stuff. But as soon as like I react like that to those situations, people are just like, and especially I'll be like, look back and I'll be like, I was actually justified in what I was saying, but a person will be like, well, the way you said it wasn't acceptable or whatever it might be. And I'm like, oh yeah, and I've been, I've had a lot of situations in the last year or so where I've had to really put a lid on that for the simple reason that I'll still say the exact same thing, but I'll try and not say it in this heated or as an emotional way, because I don't want the end of the discussion or the argument to be, it doesn't matter whether what you were saying was right, you shouldn't have said it how you said it. And that's the whole thing, is like, so people will often point to that when it comes to they're like, as soon as you like, if you disagreed with somebody, they'd be like, oh, well, you mustn't be on your meds, you must have forgotten your meds, or it must be you're not disagreeing with me because I'm wrong, you're disagreeing with me because of your mental health. But then at the same time, when there's actual things that we are doing because of our mental health, that like, then people tend to be like, well, they forget the mental health thing for a second. It's like, well, that's just your personality. And I feel like it's used either, well, that's just your mental health, or that's just your personality, interchangeably, by the same people to just suit whatever narrative they actually want to have in that moment. And it's annoying. It's a bit of a scapegoat, because if someone without a diagnosed condition was having the exact same discussion with them, they wouldn't be able to go like, well, that's just their bipolar talking, or that's just their BPD talking, or whatever it might be. They'd actually have to sit and listen. And I find it to be, such a frustrating thing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, like, funnily enough, I had a lot of people in my life in the past who would constantly say, oh, you need to stand up for yourself more, you need to get more of a backbone. But then when I do it to them, they do not like it at all. And I'm like, so basically you mean I'll stand up for yourself, but not to me?
Yeah. Oh no, still one of your absolute favorite things from the last time we spoke that you said was when someone gets upset with you for the fact that you were doing all this mental health advocacy, but you missed like one message, and it's like, well, I now hate you because you weren't there for me in that exact moment. And it's like, and it's funny because, like, again, this is that hypocritical thing, is that someone since the last time we spoke accused me of being fake and self-centered because I didn't get their message, and their message was on a Facebook page that hadn't been updated for like 6 months and stuff. And I was just like, oh crap. As soon as I saw it, I sent a really long apology, like saying, I don't come onto this page anymore. It's literally auto posts from my Instagram. It's like, I don't check in here. Like what you said before we started recording it, I've got all my notifications and stuff turned off right now, because I think when you're in the social media space, what people don't realize is that not enough notifications is a source of problems for you when you're in that space. Like, because you're like, why are my posts not doing well, or why is this not happening? But too many it's just as much of a problem, just in a completely different direction. And I know that if I look at my phone and it's got all of those red circles on it, I'm just like, there's too much. So yeah, so I'm behind on everything, like just everything. I was joking to chat before saying that I'm so close to being caught up right now that I almost feel like I'm not behind. I'm still behind, and I'll always be behind, but I'm less behind than usual. And this person really kind of like tore a strip off me in the DMs, and then I apologized and said, look, and then basically finished it even after he tore a strip off me, saying, sorry about I missed it and everything. How can I help? And then just again another message coming back, and it's a shame because I just think I just find it quite interesting that person's asking, like accusing me of being self-centered when I didn't respond to like one message. But that's all he knows of me, that I didn't respond to his message. He doesn't know that I have responded to everybody else's. And in fact, actually, if he knew that I'd responded to everybody else's, if he's coming at me from that mindset in that moment, that probably would piss him off even more, because then it'd be like, if I'd not responded to anybody, then it's probably better for him. But if I've responded to 99 out of 100 and I've missed one, like, to him, that's it. In his world, he's the one that's got missed. So it's it's an interesting situation to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people seem to mistake like mental health advocates as like substitutes for therapists.
Yeah.
And also, again, it's like, they forget we're also living with these conditions. So some days we may have limited bandwidth of responding to things. And some other days I'm like, you know what, actually I'm doing really well. I just want to have today to do really well and not focus on mental health stuff.
Yeah.
But people only seem to see, oh, well, you're not responding to my message, so you're a fake. Yeah. Rather than thinking I'm a mental health advocate. That does not mean I'm responsible for your mental health. And the thing is, I think especially early on in my own advocacy, and even just when I was really struggling, like I kind of see both points, but sometimes like when you're so in that state, you're not thinking rationally. So you think, oh my God, why isn't this person helping me?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, like, with society these days, they're kind of like, oh, we want you to change and grow. We want you to develop, blah, blah. But then they'll be like, oh, but you used to be like that. So you need to be okay with that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think even like cutting off toxic people, for example, I reacted like a toxic person as well.
Yeah.
But then people will then throw that and be like, oh, well, you're no saint, so why are you cutting these people out? And I'm like, yes, I reacted or whatever, but I still need to look after my mental health. If this person is bad for me, they're bad for me, regardless of our relationship or whatever. And that's something I've really learned just even in the past few months, is that that people that have been in my life for years, like they basically only saw me if they wanted to criticize me, whether that's how I look, whether I didn't wash, what I'm wearing, what I'm eating, what I'm not doing. But yet all of a sudden they're proud of me because I won an award last year, or I'm doing whatever.
An award that I was up for, by the way, everybody.
Sorry.
It's fine. It's absolutely... Yeah, collaboration, not competition. It's what I always say.
But no, I think like a lot of people will try. I think it's, again, I see both points where I'm glad that people's perception of mental health is changing. But at the same time, I'm not going to give them credit when they were the ones that were calling me attention seeking 5 years ago. Yeah. That now, because I've got a platform, that they're like, oh, well done, I support you. Fuck off. Like, no, I think I let people take advantage of my kind nature too much. But then I think that's the other thing, though, that because I'm now having boundaries or standing up for myself, people then be like, oh, you're letting all this stuff get to your head, you're getting full of yourself. And I'm like, no, you just don't like that I'm not a doormat anymore. Yeah. That I'm not going to make myself uncomfortable to make you comfortable.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the concept of boundaries comes up on the stream all the time. And the most succinct way I found to put it so far is that the people who reject your new boundaries are usually the ones that benefited the most from your old ones. And it's like they stand the most to gain from you having the old boundaries. And again, the old boundaries don't suit them where they are. And it's an interesting one because, again, going back to that scapegoat thing, is I think a lot of times people can just be like, oh, well, I wasn't the issue. he was the person with BPD. And it's like, again, it turns into this big scapegoat, and it's actually, well, yeah, but like another expression I really like to say is that your mental health might explain your behavior but doesn't excuse it. It's like, well, okay, but what's their explanation for their behavior? You know, it's like we might not have an explanation but not an excuse, but you don't even have an explanation. It's like, you're just like, there's been 3 of my shorts in the last 2 weeks that have had the word arsehole in them. And I think that's because we keep on seeing this. It's like, look, I'm not trying to excuse the way I act when I'm symptomatic. I'm not trying to do it at all. But again, that justice sensitivity that I have, it's like, well, you're literally you're coming at me for acting in a way that you yourself have acted, and you don't have. You're blaming my condition for why I'm acting the same way, but actually, what are we blaming for why you're acting that way? It's like you did the exact same thing, just maybe not with the volume turned up to 11 like I did, you know. And especially when someone in an argument would say that basically, that I'm overreacting, and I'll be like, I'm reacting to your reaction. It's like your reaction was the first thing here that actually, because I'd try and calmly talk about boundaries or try and talk about a new situation, that person would react to me in a way that would treat what I'm doing as unreasonable or would not understand what I'm saying whatsoever. And then that's when like my emotions go faster than my brain is probably the easiest way to describe it at that point.
I think like a lot of people like that, it's almost like they rely on your reaction to their reaction in a sense, like, because just an example, my partner's quite new to therapy and boundaries himself. But basically somebody left an inappropriate comment on Facebook, and Ben basically told them not to. And so one of his, well, now ex-friends, bearing in mind, like, he's near enough in his 50s, like, messages Ben saying, oh, I think Brian's controlling you. And, you know, and also, like, this person was supposed to have moved elsewhere. They then moved back and all of a sudden was like, oh, I miss you, Ben. I want to see you. And I'm like, why are you then projecting that shit onto me? Like, you met me once. You don't know me as a person. And, you know, I think it's very easy. I think because unfortunately with the gay community, in my experience anyway, I can't speak for everybody, but they seem to blur boundaries as a way of being progressive.
Right.
Of kind of being like, oh yeah, well, not everybody's into monogamy or like whatever, or like, I don't have to respect your boundaries if I don't agree with it. And I think it's very damaging because I think, you know, my mindset is like, you know, however people want to live, that's fine as long as you're not hurting people.
Yeah.
But also, if somebody says they're not okay with something, if that's their boundary, whether that's your boundary as well or not, you still need to respect that.
100%.
And yeah, I also found, like, even with relatives in the past or friends or whatever, like, they would dish it out, but they couldn't take it back. Like, I very much grew up with somebody that was literally like, oh, don't you know who I am? Who do you think you're talking to? And I'm like, I'm just talking to you. Like, you know, I think especially when it comes to family, for example, they will think that they can treat you differently because they're family. They're like, oh, well, I'm your mother, I'm your sister, I'm your uncle, whatever. And I'm like, toxic. Like, I don't care if I've been in your life for 25 years or whatever. Like, I'm not tolerating abuse anymore in any form. But I found as well that I think sometimes people project. Like, I feel like I was very much a scapegoat of my system growing up. And basically I started talking about it. And then I got like a very passive aggressive text on Christmas Day from a relative, again, in their 40s, being like, oh, happy Christmas from your toxic origin family. I'm
Wow.
like, considering you don't text me all year round, you don't want to know me as a person, but now you're going to text me. Cool. But it's quite interesting seeing the different reactions to different people to me doing this sort of thing. Some people would act oblivious, like, oh, I don't understand why he's doing this. And I'm like, you know why. Other people, again, trying to be like, oh, I'm proud of you. And I'm like, were you proud of me when you physically assaulted me? Sure. And other people, again, just being passive aggressive. And thing is, I never mentioned who it was, you know, but so to me, I felt like then that was a guilty conscience talking. Because I come from a large family. Like, my mum's one of 13, so I could be talking about anybody.
One of 13.
I know, like, but I think that was just like the last nail in the coffin. I think I was just like, you know what? Again, like, you only seem to see me when I'm doing something wrong. And, you know, I'm just stating facts of situations that have happened. You know, it's not gossip, it's not slander. I'm just speaking about my experiences. And, you know, I think a lot of people were always relying on me on, like, being quickly shut back down. And so I think, like, that was another thing with, like, moving out and being with Ben and stuff, and just even speaking to other people that had seen stuff from the outside, like, felt quite validating, but also, like, again, a sense of grief, because, like, oh, I did see it for what it was, but I was so gaslighted and invalidated for years. I thought, oh, maybe I am the problem. You know, I think, you know, there was an incident where, bear in mind, I was still living at home at this point. Again, big family. They decided to throw my mum a 60th birthday party. I didn't know till I turned up with my mum. None of them wanted to include me in preparing it or anything. And, like, I looked stupid because, like, our birthdays are like 5 days apart. So I thought it was a joint thing, but no, it was just for my mum, which was a nice thing for them to do. But I'm like, why did they not want to include me in anything?
Yeah.
And yeah, again, I'm like, did I do something as a child that I'm not remembering? Like, but I think, you know, I'm slowly learning to kind of realize that how they act, how they feel is not my responsibility anymore.
Fair enough. I mean, that's a lot of family to have to feel that way about it. but one of 13, I'm still a bit staggered by that. So in terms of kind of like communication and stuff, what has there been? Actually, no, I'll come back to that, because I said I'd come back to the BPD and autism thing, and if I don't do that now, I won't do that. So, and I know for definite I'm going to ask the other two questions. So, yes, Dave, your train of thought is on the track today. So I've again, interestingly enough, I found that once you have a creator with any condition on, I suddenly then end up finding loads of other people with the same condition, and end up, like, you know, kind of that Instagram or TikTok will be like, hey, if you like BPD Bryan, you'll also like do. Like, I've got a huge neurodivergent community now. So I've seen a lot of content on BPD, and we've got a few within our community. Well, quite a number in our community with BPD as well. So it's been a hot topic for us over the last few months. In terms of obviously one of the newer narratives of that is what you mentioned before, which is BPD and autism might be linked, or as it sometimes is said, BPD is autism. Like, what's the narrative on that at the minute? What's kind of being put out there with that?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I don't actually know too much about it at the moment, but, like, I think the thing is, I keep seeing conflicting things where people are, oh, people can't have BPD and autism, and other people are saying it is quite common for it to overlap. But I think it's usually like the emotion dysregulation and, like, self-harm and stuff. But I think another conversation I had with Ben was about that, because my home environment was so unsafe, I think I must have learned to mask at a very young age, because I feel like since living in my own place and being around Ben, who I feel really comfortable around, I'm doing a lot more kind of like stimming behaviors or whatever. And like I think I started doing stimming as a coping mechanism from what I can remember was when I was at work. So I felt safe to do it there. Because again, home environment, I was always mocked, teased, bullied about anything because I was sensitive, whatever. And so speaking to Ben, like I said that I'm not sure whether I still relate to the symptoms of BPD, but then going through it, because I was going through my BPD workbook and it said to, I think it was like doing it in like what it's been like for the last 2 weeks.
Right.
And I found it like, recently anyway, I don't think like my mood swings are intense. Like I'd still say I'd have them, but they're not as intense as they used to be. But also just, you know, lack of sense of self at the moment. I'm just like, do I have BPD? Is it just BPD? Is it just autism? What the fuck is going on? But so I think like I'm feeling at the moment it might possibly be autism with BPD traits. Yeah. But there's also this sense of like, because I've been talking about BPD for so many years, there's a sense of like, people are going to think I'm a fraud. People are going to think I'm faking it because now I've got something else. But I think also, again, going back to that thing of BPD symptoms can go into remission. I'm also not sure whether that's it. I think I just overthink. That's just it's my party trick, basically. Like I can overthink anything. But...
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think... Well, first of all, will people think you're a fraud? Well, if you throw enough, if you attract enough people, the problem is you attract a percentage of trolls or a percent. So yes, but then the thing is, there's probably already people that think that. And something that you know, there was someone who mentioned the RuPaul quote earlier of what people think of me, or other people think of me is none of my business. And I think it's true, because actually we only ever focus on what negative people think about us anyway. If we know 100 people and 98 of them, yes, let's just be realistic on this. 50 of them think you're awesome. 48 are kind of indifferent towards you, and 2 of them think you're an arsehole. We focus on the 2 that think you're an arsehole. Like we don't focus on the 50 that think you're awesome. And but the thing is that like I'm in a sort of similar position where a friend of mine who's very, very similar to me had been diagnosed with bipolar at roughly the same age as I had. And like literally last year was re-diagnosed with ADHD with bipolar traits. And that's kind of where I sit with a lot of what is actually really, you know, what I'm more symptomatic of really. And the same, but I think one thing you said earlier about BPD going into remission and people are unsure about that or whatever, I think the main thing is that every single mental illness, not actually BPD is not even a mental illness, is it? It's a personality disorder, but it's but any sort of neurodivergence or any mental illness or personality disorder, there's the biological component and then there's the environmental component. And the thing is, some people biologically are like 100% there all by themselves. Other people are biologically 20%. You know, tendencies of this and then to get the other 80%, that's all environmental. So when you're in a toxic environment, you know, the way that those kind of stresses work is that it combines, it adds up to the 100%, and then you're symptomatic at that 100%. So I think now, obviously, few things. One, switching the notifications off your phone. I've only just done it a month ago. I switched some notifications off, but I switched the whole thing on to Do Not Disturb about 6 weeks ago, and it was honestly, I've just got so much more space up here. It's brilliant.
How was it when you first turned them off, though? Was it kind of like, I still want to look? Like,
yeah, I still look. I still look, but it's on my time.
Yeah.
It's on my terms. I still look far too much if I'm being honest about it.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel like it's just as good as if the notifications were on anyway. So I'm just staying on there refreshing it.
Yeah, but I suppose then that way around, it's usually because it used to be like this. The notifications, if I was close to being symptomatic, could push me to being symptomatic, and then once I'm symptomatic, that's the point at which I'll check, and I'll check at the top and I'll check at the bottom. I'll check at the top because I'm riding higher and everything's going great, and I'll check at the bottom because I need validation. Surely it's like looking in an empty fridge and just consistently reopening it and hope that someone stocked it with something delicious. But yeah, so I'd do that. But now the difference is now that if I'm doing that, it means I'm already there. At least the phone hasn't helped me get there. And yes, much more clarity and little things, because it's not having that buzz, not having like, because I had it on the watch as well, so it'd be like buzz in my pocket, buzz in my watch at the same time. Like, and there was a very brief like millisecond delay, so it'd be like, zzz, zzz, you know, it's like, which was so there's that. But obviously, yeah, I mean, being in a stable relationship is one of the things that just makes everything else that little bit easier to do, because you've got that support there. You've got that support there, and obviously, yes, you will still have those same thoughts, like you say, if he doesn't respond in a certain amount of time, because you're conditioned to think that way, as in like, you know, what's happened, and yeah, your thoughts will go to what's happened a lot quicker. Meanwhile, because mine's probably ADHD, I kind of forget I've got a partner unless she walks into the room. So it's like, oh shit, yeah.
I mean, I get that as well, but I think like it also helps having a partner that wants to understand. Because I think previously I had people where they just didn't really care. They were just like, oh, well, that's your problem. Mm-hmm. But then they'd wonder why I'm like, again, like symptomatic or whatever. They're like, oh, I don't understand. I'm like, well, I've tried telling you, like 5 times, but you just don't want to see it. And so I think definitely having somebody that wants to understand, and also I think a big thing as well is that my partner wants to work on himself as well. Yeah. Which is probably another major factor, because I think a lot of people are like, no, I'm fine as I am. And I think that's the trouble I see with like some of like comments on videos where they'll be like, oh, well, I'm fine as that. And I think like sometimes it's these quotes though, where it's like, oh, you're perfect as you are and stuff, which like to a point I agree. But then it gets to the point where, again, people are like, nope, everything I do is fine. Mm-hmm. There's nothing I need to work on.
The way I dissect that quote, because I'm a big fan of telling people they are enough, and I occasionally remember to tell myself. That means you are enough as you are now, and it does. It means it means you don't need to do any more to be valid and worthy as a human being. However, I do believe that we all owe it to not just everyone around us, we owe it to ourselves. Personal mastery is such an important self journey, and it's like I say, you know, self first isn't selfish. If you work on your personal mastery, looking after yourself better, learning yourself better, everybody benefits from that. Like everybody you come into contact with benefits from that. And the thing is, you are enough means you can't go back in time and change what made you the path that you've taken to get to here. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you're everything you're ever going to be. It just means that what you are right now is enough. It still means you can develop and move forward from there. And honestly, like I think that's one of the reasons I'm in a, like, we have a mental health check-in on the stream now. It's like it's 1 to 5 where you are, and today I've put my first 5, and I know it's because this weekend I've actually had the time. I've had some time. Well, I didn't have the time over the weekend. It was mostly yesterday because my kids were using me as a taxi service over the weekend. But well, I say the kids, the eldest, but he's 16. He's got friends. They go out. It's all that stuff. But yeah, I've done a bunch of stuff for myself over the last week or so, and particularly yesterday, I got so kind of close to being up to date with things. Still behind, but not as behind. And I've not been there for ages, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I've done something just for me, and that's made such a massive difference for me. Like, I feel like I've got like extra spoons today. I feel like I've got like, more capacity today than I've felt in a long, long time. Don't someone in chat test that theory when, later on, like, don't feel like you can all just like throw everything at me. Now you can, you always can. But, but yeah, it's like that self-first thing. And I think, yeah, it's the other one that I think really applies to both BPD and bipolar is the expression that if someone else has a problem with you, that's their problem and not yours. And it's like, it's one of those, it's like, I love that because the thing is, the reason I love that saying is because most people that I speak to have been conditioned to feel that everything is their fault. And as a result, every single time that somebody else has a problem, they think it's their fault. So if someone's been caught in traffic on the way into the office and is a little bit under the weather and can't be arsed and walks past all on the way through, and then the person who's been conditioned to think that everything's their fault will be like, oh, what have I done to do that? And it's like, even though you've had no contact with this person yet at all this day. So that's why I think that's important. But unfortunately, it does then put aside the type of people who just are toxic to everybody. And the expression I kind of like on this one is, if you meet an arsehole, then you've met an arsehole. But if you're constantly meeting arseholes, chances are you might be the arsehole. It's like if everybody you meet is toxic, there's and I think, again, that can be one of those things that's taken out of context as well. But in reality, it's about finding this, people either think that they're the best thing since sliced bread, or there's something that people have stepped in, and no one ever really seems to think that they're anything in between. It's like either everything's everybody else's fault or everything's my fault. Not some things are my fault, some things are other people's fault. And the expression I love for this is tend to the part of the garden you can touch. It's like what is my part in all of this? Trying to be objective with it. And I think, again, a lot of those sayings, and they're used so readily in the mental health community. They're supposed to give a person self-esteem, but ultimately they do lead certain people to just being like, well, if they've got a problem with me, that's not on me. I didn't do anything wrong. It's like finding that delicate balance.
I think, again, these quotes, because they are so readily available, again, I think it does fall into wrong hands. And as well, a lot of people seem to, especially on Twitter and everywhere, they seem to lack context. But I think also, I'm just quite wary of that particular quote, or kind of, if everyone else around you is an arsehole, then you're an arsehole. I think, again, with context, I think, again, with how attachment styles work and coming from abusive systems, again, going back to what I said earlier about, you end up then attracting to those familiar things.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was more, 80% of people around me were toxic. But I think I saw something years ago. I think you don't actually pay that much attention to the healthy people in your life because you don't have to work at that.
Yeah.
But I think as well, unfortunately, I live in a small town, and it seems to come with that kind of small town mentality where, people are still acting like they're in school and they're 27 years old. Hell, even some of them in their 50s. I think, again, because I think it's not on the person that attracts those sort of people. I think in a way, there may be something you may need to work through. Okay, what is it about me that's attracting these kinds of people into my life? Whether it's a toxic, narcissistic sort of person. I think that was something I really had to look at. I was okay, I didn't stand up for myself. I kind of quickly backed down, and, even just some ways I became friends with people seemed a bit creepy, where they literally just picked me out on a school trip, oh, I'm going to sit with you. It was a bit weird. But also just paying attention to how people talk about others, or if they don't have anything to benefit from. Or thing is, I think we all like a bit of gossip, but I think if people are mainly just gossiping all the time, I'm this doesn't feel good anymore. I think that's something So we're so good at gaslighting ourselves, right? We're always like, okay, well, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Maybe it's not that bad. But I think that's sometimes what kept me in toxic situations.
Yeah.
And then, because then you keep expecting it to change and it doesn't. Like I met up with some people who I hadn't seen for a good 2 years earlier this year. And after spending one evening with them, they were still bitching about each other and stuff. And I'm like, you haven't changed in 2 years. You're still doing the same dance here. I'm good. And this wasn't long actually after I moved out. And one of them was constantly like, oh, tell me where you live. Why won't you tell me where you live? I'm like, you do not need to know that information. And I think as well, especially on social media, people like to brag about being toxic, which I find very weird. But I think, sometimes I laugh at my own toxic stuff I've done in the past, but it's just a way to deal with it. But I think, it's just I think sometimes I feel like I have too much empathy though, because I think that's also what gets me into bad situations. I'm like, oh, well, they did have a bad childhood, or, they did have this happen, or they did lose their jobs. And I'm constantly making justifications for how they talk to me, or again, I'm like, oh, well, sometimes I shouted at them or whatever. I'm like, but, I wouldn't ever name call them, or, I wouldn't tell them that they're useless, that they're pathetic or anything like that. Sometimes, again, just a reaction that they kind of prey upon.
Definitely. Everyone in chat, I've got 2 more questions, which are the ones I'm coming back to. And I do want to make sure I get questions from chat in today, because I forgot last week and they never let me hear the end of it. So please at me or highlight your message. Either way will work, because it means I can scroll through chat and find them quickly. The 2 questions I want to ask you, which were the ones I was going to segue into earlier. Number 1 is, what is something about communication that you have learned that has helped you to better navigate relationships, given your situation?
Probably just taking a moment. I think, especially looking through something that there's somebody that I watch on YouTube who does a lot of stuff about BPD. It's called like a BPD Lens. Mm-hmm. And so it's basically like your immediate reaction of what you're wanting to say is like not the greatest reaction. So even just, okay, that text message is a bit off. I'll wait a minute. But I think also even just saying what my needs are in order for both people to benefit. I think very early on in mine and Ben's relationship, we were both a bit codependent, where if we were disagreeing or something, we'd be like, oh, don't go, or whatever. But then that would build up. I want time to myself. Or I want to just be alone for 5 minutes. And I think we have great communication in a way where we'll sit down and we'll talk about things. And we also we haven't done it for a while just because Christmas and everything, but we usually do like a mental health Sunday where we'll both go to like a cafe or something and do a bit of work on ourselves. And I've never had that before, so it's kind of weird.
I was going to say, I want this. Me and my other half fell in love over bloody self-help books, and I don't think I've seen her read one since. I think she catfished me.
Would it be a bit of a passive-aggressive present if you got one for a birthday?
Maybe. Keep on putting them on the the Audible playlist. Although she actually does listen to more of them now than I do, but it's but. That's awesome. I'm really happy that you've got those mental health Sundays. They sound great. And if you've not done one for a while, I'd say try and get one in again soon.
I mean, this Sunday we've done it, and then we ended up having McDonald's in bed at 10 o'clock in the evening because we were hungry. So.
Hey, I'm a very big fan of a little bit of what's bad for you in can be self-care. Especially if I cook most of our food here, and the kids are now beginning to cook for themselves, which is quite nice. But there was a period where I was cooking the kids' stuff and I was cooking my stuff and all that stuff and all of that. And for me, actually getting a takeaway even though I know, like, you know, I know I'm probably going to feel a little bit groggy after it. I'm probably going to feel a little bit. I know digestively it's not good for my mental health and so on and so forth. But I also know that not having to cook it and then not having to clean up afterwards is very good for my mental health. So it's finding the balance and all that. What do you think is something that other people could learn to make it easier for them to communicate with people with BPD?
I suppose going back to that thing of like, stop blaming it on the BPD. I think even just, I think the beginning of it is to really understand, wanting to understand, wanting to figure out how it affects that person day to day. And, you know, is there anything that they can do to meet halfway? I think I'm a little better now, but I think like when I wasn't doing well a bit earlier in the year, like me and Ben would constantly have specific times we would talk to each other. So that would be like at lunchtime or like after he's finished work or anything. I think like just things like that can help. Or even like I read into it too much anyway, but I did say to him, I was like, sometimes I was like, if you ended up putting like one less kiss, I'm going to like go into a spiral and think like you absolutely hate my guts. But luckily, like if he ever forgets one, he'll like just put another 3, it's fine. But I think it's really hard because I know that like not everybody has a healthy situation. And so I think a lot of it sometimes for those less healthy people in your life, I think it's a lot about managing expectations and just thinking, okay, this person just doesn't want to understand my mental health. I won't talk to them about it. Or, okay, I'll only see them for an hour and certain topics are off limits. I won't share stuff. I think because I think we're all kind of conditioned to be like, okay, but if I do it this time, maybe it'll get through. But I think, you know, if it's somebody, you know, for 10 years, they're not wanting to understand, they're not going to change anytime soon. And so I think sometimes for communication as well, is finding those people you can talk to. Whether that, again, that could even just be like Twitter, like some people that do understand it. I think that's been a major help, is being engrossed in a community that experiences it really helps.
Yeah. Because
I think before joining Twitter or anything, I felt so alone, so much like an alien that, you know, again, if everyone else is going, oh, well, you're the problem, we don't do anything wrong, that kind of thing, oh, shit. And I think that's, you know, another play on kind of, you know, when people say, oh, if everyone around you is an arsehole, I'm like, it depends, like, again, whether they're like, if they're never taking responsibility for anything or whether they're never apologizing. So I often found that was the case, or they'd be like, oh, yeah, well, I did do this, but you said that, or whatever. Like, they'll find a way to, you know, excuse it instead of just saying, I'm sorry. And so I think even just managing that communication, and I think especially in terms of like phones and stuff as well, I think figuring out whether you prefer, you know, texting, phone calls, FaceTimes, I think, and also just, that actually happened today because I knew also I had this, but also I wasn't feeling that great. I said to Ben, I was like, I'll talk to you for like 2 minutes, but I just want to go lie down because I wasn't feeling great. And so I think that's another testament of like how healthy my relationship is. I think like at first I would have been petrified to ask, like, oh, can I go lie down? But like, I think now I'm just a lot more aware of, again, what's best for me and other people around me. So, you know, if I say I need 5 minutes, don't expect me to explain, don't expect me to over explain and spend another 5 minutes telling you why I want to go and lie down. And I think, I think that comes with boundaries as well, I think.
Yeah. A huge thing I think about boundaries, and it's just kind of like popped back into my head while you were saying that then, was when we actually give someone boundaries, or we state our boundaries. First of all, it takes energy and it takes courage to state your boundaries to somebody else. But it's actually it's never because you want that person out of your life. It's actually because you want to keep them in your life, but you just want to. Yeah, and this is the modification that that would make things fit better for everybody, really. And it's and often when you try and state boundaries to people, like, again, they do take it quite personally, or and I think for like the over communication of saying that this is about something that I need. This is like for example, that social rhythm thing. There's the classic example I've been using for this recently is my absolute best friend in the whole world, who is basically I'm trying to think of which way around to say it. I think because it's totally stolen from Grey's Anatomy, but it's like I say to my wife that she's my soulmate, but he's my person. I think that's that way around.
Okay.
I think, and like he was around a few months back, well, about 2 months back now, and we had an absolutely amazing time. And like, he was just like the next day, oh, we need to do that again soon. And I was just like, yeah, we need to do it again. I'm not sure about the soon part though. And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, look, I absolutely love you, and I love spending time with you. I think you're amazing. And I don't think I've ever had a bad experience with him and I've known him for nearly 16 years now. And yeah, I said, this is about me. And I tried to explain it to him. He's an only child, and literally has wanted to have people around him forever, like always wanted siblings, didn't have them. So, and he's very almost incapable of being on his own. And like he'll admit that himself. Meanwhile, I'm like incapable of going too much time without being on my own. And that's nothing down to me saying that my way is right and his way is wrong, or his way is right and my way is wrong. It's about basically, it's about those rhythms. And my wife was like, because I said something similar to my brother-in-law a week later, because he was like, we'll have to do it again soon. And she's like, you keep on saying that to people. I'm like, yeah, I think it's the right thing to do though. And she's like, do you not think it's rude? I'm like, no, it's rude to tell people that you're going to see them again soon and then not. That's rude. Telling people that I do want to see you again, but I'm being realistic with kind of like how I recharge my social battery, or like how I can't have more than a few social arrangements on in a week. Otherwise I start getting very kind of agitated in them, and people will get like a worse version of me. They'll get a burnt out version of me. And it's like, so I said, it's, I'd love to be able to, because my wife's again the same. If she says, yeah, she'd be there. She's fine. She's okay with it. She's a social butterfly, just keeps on recharging the more she spends time with people. And I think over communicating that, I think we need to normalize that as well, that introverts aren't antisocial. It's like, we're just differently social. And again, let's stop pointing fingers about like who's right or wrong in those situations. Like, and that goes back to that hypocrisy thing that I just can't stand. It's like, oh, you don't, it's like, well, so wait a minute, you think I'm wrong because my social rhythm doesn't match yours. Well, in that case, I can think that you're wrong because my social rhythm doesn't match me. Oh no, I'm right. It's like, again, let's just accept that we're different and take it from there.
I think that's why also, like, I'm very reluctant to say I'll always be there for you.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll be there for you when I can, and if I have the capacity to. Because I think, like, especially
my DMs are frequently open.
Because like I would literally take, like, when people said that to me, I would take that personally. So then, because I think sometimes, like, without it being malicious, I wouldn't understand boundaries.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, oh, they said I could always be there for them, so I'll call them at 2 a.m. or whatever.
Let's test the validity of this statement.
Yeah, and so I think, like, just being aware again of both sides, and I think it's easy. I think the thing is, I think sometimes we do take things personally initially if somebody says something, but I think it's about just not reacting. Like, okay, I understand. I think I think society's trying to get. I think that it's almost going to a point where they're acting as if they don't do anything wrong themselves. Yeah, and so to. When people say, oh, I never get jealous, I'm like, it's a universal human emotion. You do, you just don't want to admit it. Like, I think, like, people are just trying to come across like self-righteous in a way, or like the I don't know the word, something of humankind. But I think, as someone that's neurodivergent, I think sometimes I do find it hard to label my own emotions. So sometimes that gets in the way of communicating. So I'm like, I feel something, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I just know I need to hide in. That's I remember, I think me and Ben went into town one Sunday or something. We came back and I was just like, I'm overwhelmed. I need to go into the bedroom. So I literally went in there, had the lights off, lay down 5 minutes. I came out. I was like, so how's it going? As if nothing happened. And sometimes you just need that 5 minutes to just turn everything off.
Absolutely. I think that's an awesome phrase to end it on. Before we do disappear, though, where can people find out more about you? Where can people connect with you?
Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all under BPD Bryan. So I don't know anything about Again, like you, I've got a Facebook page, but I don't use it.
Yeah, I don't even push mine anymore. I tried to keep it for a while because I got to 10,000 followers on there, and it was so as a result, it was my most followed page, but it was my most followed but least interacted with, and that's that's like, yeah. That's really not what you want. It's not 10,000 people that aren't listening, great. Or if they are listening, they're not interacting. Meanwhile, it's like, I'd much prefer a room of 10 with 10 people listening than a room of 10,000 with 50 people listening, It's like, and and also it's a very quick way to spread yourself too thin. That's one of the things that's really helped with my self-care in the last 2-3 weeks is the fact that I made a vow to basically streamline my content. And my content now is all clips from stream. And I don't care if people want something different than that because basically I'll say what I'm going to say and I'll be like, oh, I can reuse that. And I'll chop it down to a minute and I'll put it on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Hover, in whatever. I'll put it in all those places. And it's like I don't care if I've not specifically made it for TikTok and timed it with a dance, or I don't care if I've not specifically made it for Instagram and used their caption generator. I've got a caption generator myself, so it's like you know what, it's and I would say I'm at a point where I'm getting out reasonably relative to what I'm putting in, as opposed to putting in hours and hours and hours to put things on social media that no one really can. If they do they don't bloody let me know. So and now I've got more people letting me know and that they do. So it's finding that balance between what works for you, for your audience, and what works for you as an individual, because you're the one at the end of the day who's got to keep on doing the work and putting it out there. So you need to kind of, it can't be burning you out either. Is there anything else? Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. I was just saying that I think actually I've seen a lot of people talk recently about like finding which platform works best for you. Because like you'll try and put things in everything, but you're like, oh, I'm not quite vibing with Instagram or whatever. And I think like, thing is, I don't know, sometimes it's when I'm symptomatic, like I could be on Twitter and I'll see one tweet that pisses me off. I'm like, Twitter's a terrible place. I'm never going back on it. And then 5 minutes later, I'm tweeting. But I think I'm doing a lot better at using the block button or even just muting people. Because I'm like, you know what? Like, I don't want to be one of those like toxic positivity people, but I'm like, your toxic negativity to other people is really kind of getting old now. Like constantly like tearing into people. So I'm just going to mute you, block you. I don't want to see that. Like you do you. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's just, I think again, it's curating your social media to what you want to see, which is hard because I think especially on Twitter, people are currently talking about like ratios and things. And again, like, oh, well, I'm following you, so why aren't you following me? I'm like, because it's not a contract. I don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah. But, no, I hate all that stuff. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Probably, but I'll probably think of it after it's finished.
Amazing. I've just had a little scroll through chat. There wasn't any questions. There was a few statements and things, but there's not been any questions. So chat, I didn't ignore it. So everybody, can we have some exclamation mark love, exclamation mark hype, all that stuff in chat for Brian? Brian, thanks again for chatting with me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And especially on a day when I know you weren't feeling 100%. So I really appreciate you giving what energy you had to us today. And yeah, we'll have to do it again in the not too distant future.
Definitely, thank you. It's actually made me feel better. I think
Good.
sometimes like it's doing that opposite action sometimes they're taught in DBT, where it's like, oh, don't feel like doing this, then you push yourself to do it. So thank you.
Oh, well, yeah, I'll take it.